Okay. Hello, Dr. Gabbard, or whoever is watching. This is my Profiles of Diverse Populations presentation. In this project, we were assigned to pick a culturally diverse group from Chapter 14 and answer some questions about them. And for this project, I picked the African American community. To begin with, the African American population in the United States is 41.1 million people according to the newest census. The African American community accounts for about 12.4% of the United States population. The states with the highest density of African Americans are in the South, specifically in states such as Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. Mississippi actually being the biggest population density with 36%. Reasons for them staying in the South has to do with slavery and Jim Crow laws enacted in the 1900s. The population density of African Americans in Warren County is 9.6%. Next, I'll be talking about the strengths and resilience of African Americans. One of the big strengths is the extended family and kinship of African American families. Grandparents are seen stepping up a lot in these families and do their part in taking care of the kids. It is not uncommon to see multi-generational families living in one home and having multiple parts and taking care of a kid. African American parents encourage their children to develop career and educational goals despite the obstacles established through racism and economic disparities. They are very goal-oriented, and their family encourages this from a young age. Racism and discrimination have caused many African Americans to develop a variety of defense and survival tactics. For example, some African Americans have developed cultural paranoia, which is mistrust of others as a result of past racism and history as racism for a cultural group. And this picture on the right is a very powerful picture that I think is a good representation of the African American community. This was the 1968 Olympics, and this picture changed the United States a lot. In this picture, you'll see a black socks, and that stands for black poverty, and the black scarf, that stands for black pride, and the fist and the glove, those stand for black power. And on this night, Tommy Smith, even though he knew it would cost him his career, he said, "Black Americans will understand what we did tonight." And I think that speaks true today in America, because when we see things like Colin Kaepernick's protest, it was people that don't understand that were the ones upset about it. And black people in Africa know what they're fighting for, and they understand that. Next, I'll be talking about the values of African Americans. One of the big values of African Americans is the church. 66% of African Americans identify themselves as Protestant. However, millennials are showing they are less Protestant than older African Americans. This is a common trend across the country as we are seeing decline in religion in general. African Americans value respecting their elders. Mentioned earlier, they have a big role in families and are respected as a result of this. Like I mentioned earlier, since there are multi-generational homes, a respect for elders plays a big part, because they are taking time out of their lives when they've already had children and gotten old and they've already moved out of the house. They're still taking that time to be a part of the family and raise the kids and be there for their families. Community-based values are also important in African American culture. They value collectivism. As Dr. Gabbard mentioned earlier in the semester, that it's not common that you'll see African American communities and neighborhoods and they'll help each other out, and that's a big value of theirs. Education is another big value for African Americans. For fact, we are seeing a spike in applicants to HBCU colleges in general, which stand for historically black colleges and universities. Morehouse College in Atlanta numbers went up over 60% in 2020 alone. Next, I'm going to be talking about some struggles that African Americans go through. First is poverty and unemployment. The poverty rate for African Americans is the worst for all races in the United States. The poverty rate for African Americans is 19.5%, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. African Americans are more likely to face more negative shocks than others and are less likely to have emergency savings. The unemployment rate for African Americans is 5.9% right now. However, the unemployment has gotten better for African Americans. It was 13.6% in January of 2012, and now it's 5.9% in October of 2022. However, another fact that did stand out to me was that 41% of African Americans own their homes, while 72% of white people own their homes. So it's a big difference, and that's a big disparity that America needs to work on and that we can help. Next, I'm going to be talking about the African American health. Some research suggests that African Americans face more mental health issues but are misdiagnosed or they are underreported. This has been suggested as racism, as there might not be as adequate doctors or hospitals in black neighborhoods and communities. The adverse effects of racism have negatively affected the mental health of African American individuals, as they are less likely to be diagnosed or seek out help because of the racism they might endure or are scared, and like I mentioned earlier, the cultural paranoia that they might face. The physical health disparities are also present for African Americans. Black women and children are more likely to die at disproportionately higher rates regardless of income. This is a scary fact because everyone should be receiving the same health care and should be able to live no matter what race you are. And like I mentioned just a second ago, this has to deal with not having adequate healthcare systems in inner city areas or in black communities in general, and that has negatively affected the community. Next, I will be talking about discrimination. African Americans have suffered a lot of discrimination in the past 5 years. We have seen this firsthand with police brutality and white power protests in America. We see that there are still segregated neighborhoods in America. Progress is being made, but there are still issues. For example, just weeks ago, we saw that horrible event at UK with the white student yelling the N-word at a black worker over 100 times. This is not uncommon in America. There are still discrimination against African Americans even after the Civil Rights Movement. And in the past 5 years, we've seen the Breonna Taylor movement and others with the Black Lives Matter movement fighting for equality in their life. And even in our hometowns, we can see that there are neighborhoods that are predominantly black and there's neighborhoods that are predominantly white. So there is still that segregated neighborhoods, even though it's supposed to be in the past. In a quote I liked, I saw Tyler Adams, the captain of the U.S. men's soccer team. He was asked about what it's like to be a black individual living in a country that can be discriminatory towards African Americans, and he said that progress is being made, but as long as there's progress, change will come. And I thought that was really powerful and something that we should continue to strive for. An acculturation. Acculturation refers to changing behaviors to fit into another culture. In America, we are shown a white culture for the most part, whether this be on ads, on TV, or people in children's books. Lack of diversity shown in media can cause other cultures to not feel welcome or accepted and feel pressured into accepting another culture. People say African Americans need to fit into this white man culture. For example, I did some research, and there have only been 11 African American senators in our over 300, almost 300 years of being a country. There have only been one African American president. That that kind of threw me back because I thought there were more African American senators, but there's only been 11 representing millions and millions of African Americans over the years, and that can kind of like lead you to not fully accepting your culture and being like trying to go into the predominantly culture that is most predominant. And so that is a big struggle with acculturation. Next, I'll be talking about historical experiences. The biggest thing has been forced slavery and the slave trade of African Americans. It is estimated that there were around 10 million slaves in America. After the slaves were freed, laws were put into place to enforce segregation. Plessy v. Ferguson established that separate but equal was legal. Very little representation in government even after civil rights movements. Plessy v. Ferguson was law for over almost 50 years until Brown versus Board of Education, which found that segregation was illegal. But there's been a lot of discrimination in the past towards African Americans, and it can still cause those adverse effects of racism from the past, or that cultural paranoia that I was talking about earlier. And going from what I mentioned earlier, that there had only been a few representatives of African Americans in our national government, and so like historically the government has not been on their side and has crossed them many times, and which has not been a good thing. Next, I'll be talking about the implications for social workers. One thing social workers must address is to challenge the deficit view of African American families. We need to adopt a perspective that includes the strengths of African American families, like strong church view or endurance and resilience in their culture. Next, we need to address the issues with finding adequate education for African Americans. Norms of school life may not equate to African American style. We need to stop treating them worse people than others, because like their background might not be the same as ours. Also, there is a very predominantly white staff in our schools, and we also need to be able to identify systemic factors in schools that affect African Americans. As social workers, we must be able to display cultural competency and sensitivity. A culturally sensitive worker is seen as a more competent than a culturally blind worker. We need to be able to be competent in our work and deal with all types of cultures, and this includes the African American culture. Being aware of our racial identity development is crucial. Also, practice approaches that empower young black men and youth and find new ways to help them. Must be competent of the past and historical experiences that they may face. African Americans have been through a lot of discrimination and racism, so they may be. So we need to be aware of this and know how the historical experiences of African Americans may affect our work, because they might not be willing to accept us as first for the work we're trying to do if a white man is trying to help them, because of the way we've treated African Americans in this country sometimes. So we need to be aware of what is going on in the past and even right now, and like try to gain that trust and be willing to accept the fact that they might not trust us at first, but that's a barrier that we need to cross. These were my sources that I used. And in conclusion, the African American culture was something that was interesting to learn about, and it really opened my eyes on just doing research such as the 11 African American senators, just how much more discrimination they went through than I had originally thought. And I think it has prepared me to be able to deal with this culture in social work and be able to work with them fluently and good. So, yeah. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.